Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. In a modest room, whose walls were adorned with faded wallpaper featuring a pattern of small flowers, sat two people. A short woman with streaks of gray in her hair, whose face was marked by sharp, as if carved features. Her nose was aquiline, her lips thin and tightly pressed. A massive rough-hewn necklace on her chest trembled each time she opened her mouth, spewing sharp, biting phrases. "Vince, do you understand that our former life is impossible for us?" the woman asked, sharply tossing her head back. "She's become a hindrance." The man, Stanley's son, looked at his mother, his gaze a mixture of defiance and a crushing sense of guilt. The soft features of his face became even more pathetic. His hands hung limply by his sides and his eyes wandered anywhere but to meet his mother's gaze. "But she's my wife, Mom. How can you not understand?" The woman threw up her hands and snorted contemptuously. "Oh, spare me your wife. You wouldn't have strayed if she meant so much to you. And I'm not going to clean up after her. She's a vegetable, and you heard what the doctor said? She has no more than a year left. What's the point of doing anything at all? I suppose she'll be perfectly fine in her great-grandmother's house. She can remember her native land and her childhood years." Vincent shook his head vaguely. "Besides, after her death, there will be a decent inheritance. That can improve our situation. So—" Vincent looked thoughtfully at his mother and sighed heavily. The next day, all the bags and suitcases containing Claire's belongings, Vincent's wife, were packed. Eleanor, the girl's mother-in-law, placed them in the corridor, barely suppressing a smirk at the sight of her bewildered daughter-in-law. Claire was a miniature, pretty girl with hair the color of ripe wheat, now confined to a wheelchair. At 27, she was suddenly struck by an illness that deprived her of the ability to move and speak. She spent almost all her time in a wheelchair, immersed in silence. Eleanor took care of her daughter-in-law while Vincent was away at his job at the insurance company. Sometimes Claire imagined that her husband deliberately stayed late, avoiding meeting his helpless wife, who couldn't even manage the simplest needs on her own. It should be noted that Eleanor had never felt any particular affection for her daughter-in-law. She disliked Claire's ambition and drive for achievement. The mother-in-law believed that a girl's place was beside her husband, supporting him, not running around all day on company business where she worked. Claire held the position of assistant to the general director of a large company. In time, she dreamed of promotion and a permanent position. Ideally, she envisioned her own business. However, she currently had neither the funds nor worthy ventures. Her daughter-in-law's illness destroyed the last vestiges of sympathy in Eleanor. If before she merely tormented the girl with nitpicking, after what happened, her voice constantly broke into a shout. She couldn't stand Claire's silent requests and often forgot about her medication or lunch. Only one thing pleased her. Claire couldn't speak and didn't interfere with the mother-in-law's constant rereading of plays in which she had once shown on the theatrical stage. While Vincent was dragging the heavy suitcases to the car, Claire sat opposite the door, watching what was happening with inexpressible horror. Her eyes were red. She could barely hold back tears. "Don't worry," Eleanor smirked. "Your doctor said your heart is weak, you won't last long, and the air in the village is healing. Perhaps you'll live this year. A little house in the village? Didn't you ever wish to return there?" A myriad of thoughts swirled in Claire's head, but she couldn't put any of them into words. Her hands rested limply on her lap. If she could, she would have squeezed the fabric of her sweatpants until her knuckles turned white, and then she would have let out a loud scream, telling her mother-in-law everything she thought about that old gray hag. "Vinny dear, what's taking you so long?" The breathless man climbed the stairs, breathing heavily. It was obvious the ascent had been difficult for him. He looked at his mother, holding out a hand. "The elevator's broken down there. I had to drag all this from the 20th floor." Eleanor threw up her hands and shook her head, casting a reproachful glance at her daughter-in-law. "And I said we should hire a mover." Mom, you know perfectly well we don't have the money for that." Once I went on stage every day, filling halls, and Mickey would come after lectures just to see me, the woman said dreamily. Could I have ever imagined I'd have to deal with diapers? Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law again and fell silent. A neighbor, Vera, passed by on the landing. Good day, the neighbor nodded. Going somewhere? Eleanor smiled broadly. Be Vera. Hello. Yes, we're taking Claire dear to a sanatorium for rehabilitation. The doctor said it should help. That must be quite expensive. Vera shook her head. Oh yes, extremely expensive, but we'll have to tighten our belts, the mother-in-law sighed. We can't leave our daughter-in-law without treatment. She's done so much for us. Vera said something else and withdrew into her apartment. The smile and pitiful expression instantly vanished from Eleanor's face. She turned to her son and frowned. Faster, before the whole building knows about our plans. I told you this should have been done first thing in the morning. Vincent picked up a suitcase and snorted. In the morning? It's freezing cold outside. It's autumn. Do you want me to get frostbite on all my limbs? The man asked, and without waiting for an answer, he left the apartment, leaving his indignant mother behind. Vincent was the only and dearly loved child in the family. Eleanor and Michael brought him into the world at a mature age and doted on him. A law university professor and a dramatic theater star put their own affairs on the back burner, dedicating themselves to raising their son. The result of such excessive care was a weak Vincent, who at almost 40 still lived with his mother and held a low-paying job where his boss mocked him and his colleagues didn't like him. Almost 40 minutes later, Vincent finished moving all the things and Claire herself. He seated the girl in the back seat, folding her chair. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes. She was breathing heavily. Her gaze, full of incomprehension and a touch of hope, was fixed on her husband. Claire, calm down, please, the man whispered softly, adjusting the seatbelt. Someone will look after you there, a neighbor. We'll pay her from your funds. Of course, Eleanor interjected. Vincent shrugged and nodded. We're, not doing so well financially right now, so yes, from yours. You'll be better off there. Claire looked at her husband with an unblinking gaze, trying to discern in his pale face even a crumb of pity for her or reluctance to carry out what was planned. However, there was none of that, only constant glances around in search of anyone who might see the crying girl and the man carrying her to the car. Vincent and Claire's car drove away from their house exactly at noon. Eleanor waved and returned home to immerse herself once again in rereading the worn-out book of plays, imagining herself stepping onto the stage, met by thunderous applause from admiring art lovers. Vincent sighed, increasing speed. He tried not to look in the rearview mirror, where the swollen eyes of the girl sitting motionless behind him were reflected. Claire, well, you understand I have no other choice? The man could have sworn the girl raised an eyebrow mockingly. However, after wiping his glasses, he saw only his wife's stony face. My mother is trying for our good. She's right. I can't take care of you constantly. I have my job. She's not young anymore, so you'll be better off there. You'll have your own caregiver. You'll return to your great-grandmother's house, which you often remembered with warmth. So, Vincent fell silent again, turning away from his wife's gaze. However, he felt it on his back. It seemed to burn through his thin jacket and imprint itself directly on his lungs, making him breathe faster. The journey to the village where Claire was to live was long. The village was remote and almost abandoned. It had only a couple of streets with a small number of houses, one small shop in the center, and an old first aid post that had been closed for several years due to lack of staff. A dark blue car stopped with a rattle near a small house with an overgrown garden and a leaning fence. The house itself, at least from the outside, looked quite decent. The garden was full of ancient trees and thick grass, in places reaching the height of the fence. In front of the window stood an old bench on two small stumps on which someone was lying. While Vincent was getting his wife out of the car and assembling her chair and belongings, Claire stared unblinkingly at the silhouette resting near the house of her long-deceased great-grandmother. The girl squinted but couldn't make out who it was. Brenda, Vincent called out. A short woman with short hair rose from the bench with a grumble. The woman, swaying, approached the gate. Her face was wrinkled and sagging, her hair tangled. A large crack was visible on her lip, and an old bruise adorned her eye. Brenda was dressed in completely mismatched clothes. A yellow t-shirt with some English inscriptions, green short trousers completely unsuitable for the weather, and worn pink shoes with rhinestones. "Mr. Vincent!" the woman exclaimed. "You're early," Brenda said, stammering. Vincent frowned and turned to his wife. "This is your caregiver, Claire. Meet her. Her name is Brenda. She'll take care of you from now on." In confirmation of her words, Brenda nodded and swayed. If Claire could, she would certainly have rolled her eyes. The situation seemed monstrously comical and terrifyingly eerie. Vincent unloaded all the suitcases from the car, even carried them into the house, and handed Brenda a thin envelope. It obviously contained little, but judging by her appearance, it was enough. Then the man stopped in front of the chair and sighed. "Claire, why are you unhappy? I'm sure deep down you're smiling. This is your childhood home." The man surveyed the overgrown territory, the gate that fell apart in his hands, the fresh air, the constant care. What else was needed for happiness? Claire wanted to name a million things that would make her happy. However, as usual, she remained silent, glaring angrily at her husband. Each of her glances carried more thoughts than anyone could express in words. Vincent understood this, and a small worm of conscience even stirred in his soul. But then his mother's words and the numbers on the card surfaced in his mind, and the worm fell silent, anticipating the taste of money. Vincent got into the car and waved to his wife through the window. Brenda came closer to her charge, waving to the man. "Don't worry, Mr. Vincent. Everything will be fine." The man forced another smile, and the car drove away from the ill-fated house, leaving Claire alone with the empty, overgrown house and a drunkard who reeked not only of alcohol, but of everything that could be found in the village. A year later. "Vince, have you seriously not visited your wife once in—" Eleanor glanced at the calendar. "In a year?" she said with horror. "Are you completely stupid, Vince? And who raised you like this? How do you know maybe she died long ago, or worse, on the contrary, got up from the chair?" Vincent tore himself away from the television and looked wearily at the match. He had just returned from work and accidentally mentioned that he had never been to visit his wife. Eleanor was shocked and outraged. "Brenda calls me every week. Everything is fine there. I take her money every quarter. Calm down." Eleanor snorted, walked over to the sofa where her son was lying, snatched the remote control, and turned off the ill-fated box. "When I'm talking to you, you should only look at me," the woman said loudly and somewhat theatrically, shaking her head with its elaborate high hairstyle. "Brenda? Who is that anyway? That same drunkard you entrusted to look after your wife? Are you even sure she's looking after her and not drinking away the money I give her? Maybe she hasn't visited Claire in ages while you're lying here watching television?" Vincent couldn't bear it anymore. He rolled his eyes, staring blankly at the wall. "You want me to go see her tomorrow? Fine. I'll waste my only day off on a trip to a remote village to see my half-dead wife. Yes, Mom, you care for me greatly." Snorting loudly, Eleanor threw the television remote at her son and left the room, quietly uttering everything she thought about him. The next day, first thing in the morning, Vincent packed a few things, took an envelope with money, and got into the car. He looked longingly at the clock face, which showed only 8 o'clock in the morning. The man could still be sleeping, but he had to go somewhere unknown and, most importantly, for some unknown reason. He considered his mother's fears groundless. However, he had been accustomed to obeying her in everything since childhood. The journey was long. As luck would have it, the radio broke. The silence of the car and the rare shouts of unrestrained drivers made the morning even worse. Just as he was approaching the village, a large black car with a pickup bed flew towards him. It was moving fast, obviously knowing the area. A man, who looked a few years younger than Vincent, was driving. He braked sharply at the sight of the slowly moving city car and quietly apologized, saying he didn't mean to. Vincent waved wearily, not wanting to argue. The man remembered the way to the house where Claire lived vaguely. He handed the money to Brenda in the district center, where she came by bus specifically for the envelope. Vincent had only been to the village 3 times. Once when he took his wife there, the second when he was looking for Brenda, and the third when he was still dating Claire and she showed him her childhood home, telling him that her mother had spent her infancy there first, and then she herself. The dark blue car stopped next to an almost new fence. The grass in the garden was mowed but had grown significantly, as if it had been done a long time ago, and the area generally looked neglected, as if no one had been there for a long time. Vincent frowned and got out of the car. He carefully opened the gate and called out to his wife, then to Brenda. Silence. No one answered. The man wanted to go into the house, but a huge padlock hung on the door, blocking the way. Vincent tugged at the door, but it didn't budge. He took out his phone and started calling Brenda, but she didn't answer. The man wearily rubbed his forehead with his hand and looked around the area. Brenda's house should have been nearby. He had found it very close to Claire's house. At the time, it seemed like a great stroke of luck, but now his mother's suspicions didn't seem so foolish. Brenda didn't inspire confidence. However, for some reason, Vincent still trusted her. Leaving the house's territory, the man walked down the street to find Brenda's dwelling. It looked even worse than Claire's house. Vincent entered it and held his nose. An unpleasant smell hit his nostrils. It was so strong that Vincent only had the strength to quickly glance around the house. Brenda wasn't there, and he quickly rushed out of the house, breathing deeply. Having caught his breath, he raised his head and saw a stout woman passing by with 2 buckets. "Vincent!" he shouted and ran towards her. "Excuse me, do you know where Claire is?" The woman frowned. "She lived in that house," Vincent pointed. "And Brenda? Bren, the drunkard who was looking after the house?" Vincent nodded affirmatively. "Well, then she's most likely at Old Man Sam's. He lives at the end of the village. She buys moonshine from him. And who are you?" "It doesn't matter," Vincent waved him off. "Tell me where Old Man Sam's house is." "And why wouldn't I tell you?" The woman pointed the way to the local moonshiner's house. Brenda was indeed inside. She was sitting at a huge round table, drinking a yellow liquid that filled the air with its aroma. Vincent grabbed Brenda by the arms and led her outside. "Where's Claire? Who's being rude?" Brenda asked loudly, her speech slurred. She seemed to be looking straight ahead and seeing nothing. "My wife. Where is she, you drunken wretch?" "She lives nearby," Brenda smirked, raising a disobedient hand. "And what's in it for me?" Vincent angrily took out his wallet from his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and shoved them at Brenda. She, counting the money briskly, nodded contentedly. Then she slipped out of the man's firm grip and flew into Old Man Sam's house. She came out without the money but with a large bottle of cloudy yellow liquid. "Let's go." The woman waved her hand and hobbled forward, trying not to fall. Vincent followed. The woman led him out of the street. They walked along an empty road for a long time. The man thought Brenda was trying to mislead him and was about to shout at her, but in the distance, the roof of an unknown house appeared. The closer Vincent and Brenda got to it, the more he marveled at the size of the house compared to the other buildings in the village. It seemed simply huge. 3 floors, a balcony, a huge garden in the backyard. Several cars and agricultural machinery were visible. Brenda stopped near the iron gates of the house and pointed straight ahead. "Here you go. Sign here." She nodded, her head nearly falling off, and walked away without saying anything else. Vincent was in a state of shock from what he saw, so he didn't answer the woman's phrase. He rang a small bell. A clear, joyful voice rang out. "Cole, why are you so early?" Vincent was taken aback, frozen for a second. "Claire?" he quietly asked again. The voice on the other side fell silent and then sighed deeply. "Vince, come in." The door swung open, revealing a huge garden and a stone path lined with countless flowers. Stepping carefully along the path, Vincent went inside. On the steps of the house stood a short miniature girl with light hair. She was dressed in a beige suit and a shawl. She looked down at her husband from above. Her face was almost inscrutable. A mask seemed frozen on it. "I thought you wouldn't show up," the girl smirked, "but come in since you're here." Vincent was speechless. He just slowly followed his wife, who walked through the house with loud steps. Inside, the house was furnished simply but tastefully. Pleasant colors, beautiful decorations and paintings, soft, clean carpets. One of the doors led to a small office with a computer and a desk piled high with papers. "Oh, don't look in there. We've had a complete mess with papers lately. I need to sort it out better." Vincent didn't understand anything, but shifted his gaze to his wife, who looked even better than before her illness. A healthy blush covered her pale face. Gloss adorned her scarlet lips, and her eyes were lightly lined. Nothing excessive, but it seemed Vincent had never seen such beauty. Claire led the man into a large room with sofas and armchairs. "I'll make tea now and we'll talk." Claire withdrew to the kitchen for tea, leaving Vincent alone in the room. He sat down in an armchair, unable to tear his eyes away from the beauty of the room. Paintings, sofas, flowers, carpets. It all seemed unreal. The man even pinched himself to make sure it was reality. He couldn't believe that he had expected to see a sick wife in a wheelchair, and before him stood a beauty he had never seen in his life. Claire returned a couple of minutes later with a large tray holding several cups of tea. She handed one cup to her husband and took the second herself, sitting down neatly opposite him. "Didn't expect this?" she asked quietly. The man shook his head. "I didn't expect that for the sake of money, my beloved husband would send me to my death. I thought—" "Keep your meaningless excuses to yourself," Claire asked him. "I know everything about you, my dear. You hide the truth too poorly. It's all about my inheritance. When the will arrived from Germany from my great-grandmother, I was incredibly happy, imagining what kind of life we would have together from now on. But then I saw something that made me change my mind." "What?" Vincent asked, stammering. He held the hot cup of tea in his hands as if not noticing the pain and looked directly into his wife's face, hoping to see something there that would help him understand what was happening. "Remember my friend?" Claire asked. "Tanya? We worked together at the company." Vincent nodded. "She was the one who advised me to change my life a year and a half ago." Tall, stately Tanya sat in an armchair at a small restaurant, where their boss had sent them for negotiations that had already concluded. "Dinner's paid for, why not splurge?" Claire smirked, settling comfortably opposite Tanya. Tanya was Claire's colleague. She worked at the company with Claire, was several years older than her, and held the position of department head. She always wore strict suits, had a very definite opinion on many things, especially concerning finances. Claire opened a small handbag, took out an envelope, and handed it to her friend. "Look, what do you think? Is it real?" Tanya opened the envelope with interest and read the message. It was a letter from Germany. "Who is Anna Reuter?" "My great-grandmother," Claire replied, "on my father's side. She married a German when my father was about 6 or 7, and they went to live there. Then Dad returned to Russia and met Mom. The last time I saw my great-grandmother was at Dad's funeral. She offered me to go with her." "And why didn't you agree?" Tanya asked in surprise. "Should I have left Vince? He has his mother here, his job, and I never dreamed of living abroad." Tanya looked at her colleague with incomprehension. "You're incorrigible, Claire, trading a good life in Germany for a man." Claire rolled her eyes. She knew her friend's opinion of her husband perfectly well and preferred not to listen to it. Tanya was always very blunt in her statements, which gave her excellent career growth and few friends. They all ran away from her straightforwardness. "Or your Vince would be ready to sell his own mother for money. Do you even know how much your great-grandmother left you?" "There was a message attached," Claire replied. "She wrote that I was her last relative and she was leaving part of her inheritance to her husband's children and part to me. Judging by the message, it's a very decent sum, as well as a small share in an estate in Germany." "Do you have to go there to get it?" Tanya asked. There's an instruction on what to do. You can accept the inheritance in Russia. The notary will come here himself. A waiter approached, bringing food. The girls ordered a salad and a glass of wine each. I can imagine how happy Vince will be. He always dreamed of money, of his own business. You dream too, Tanya remarked, gesturing with her fork, and unlike him, you have the opportunity to run one. Don't talk about Vince like that. He's a decent person. He's just unlucky. Tanya laughed loudly. Yes, and most of all, he's unlucky with his mother. Not a mother-in-law, but I still don't understand why you live with her when you could move out. Claire shrugged. Eleanor can't live alone. She's not used to it, and it's not that hard for me to tolerate her. Tanya snorted disapprovingly and sipped her wine. I don't advise telling them about the inheritance. They'll either send you to the next world for the money, or they'll start fawning over you and take every last penny. Claire slammed her palm on the table and looked at her friend threateningly. Vince and I love each other. Nothing like that will happen. Don't escalate things. You have too low an opinion of my family. Really? The conversation ended with nothing. That same evening, Claire returned home and told her family about the inheritance, showing them the envelope. The girl had never seen them so happy. That evening, Eleanor opened a bottle of expensive wine, and despite their constant economizing, she ordered food for Vincent to celebrate. Claire felt as if her life was starting to get better. A few weeks later, Claire was walking down the street, smiling at everything around her. Life at home had improved. Eleanor had stopped picking on her. Vincent started coming home from work earlier and spending more time with his wife. Claire was sure that her life had gotten better and that it would always be this way from now on. The girl decided to stop near a men's clothing store. She wanted to buy her husband a gift and get a new tie. He was tired of all his old ones. Claire gazed at the window and didn't notice anything around her. Then she turned her head and saw Vincent. She wanted to call out to him, but then she noticed a girl walking towards him. The man hugged her and kissed her. From the unexpected blow to her gut, Claire stumbled and leaned on the display window to keep her balance. She couldn't believe what she saw. Claire didn't cause a scene. She simply returned home and went to bed early, thinking about what had happened before falling asleep. The next morning, the girl took a day off work and went to a local detective agency. A short, thin man in glasses sat at a small table. He was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. Claire sat opposite him and explained the situation. What exactly do you need? Everything, Claire said. How did they meet? How long have they been seeing each other? Their words, actions, meeting places. I want to know everything. The man whistled but said nothing. He seemed surprised by the girl's eagerness. However, he preferred to remain silent so as not to lose a client. For a whole week, Claire was in limbo. She didn't dare tell Tanya the truth, not wanting to hear her say, "I told you so." But she had to admit, Tanya was right. She seemed to see right through Vincent, not wanting them to be together. She refused to be a bridesmaid at the wedding, which greatly offended Claire. Soon they made up, but the girl still felt a lingering resentment. Only now did she begin to understand her friend, who had only wanted to reach her. A week later, Claire sat alone in a small coffee shop, drinking already cold coffee. She was thinking about what was happening. Everything in her head just couldn't fit together into a single picture. The girl had always tried for her husband, doing everything he or his mother asked. She had even swallowed her pride, lowering her ambitions. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. The detective asked her to come. Throwing a bill on the table, Claire grabbed her bag and rushed to the agency. Fortunately, it was nearby. She flew inside and sat opposite the man, who, as before, was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He raised his head to his client and adjusted his slipping glasses. You know, you're lucky your husband's mistress turned out to be so talkative. Really? Claire asked, not wanting to hear the answer to her question. But the man still nodded. I had to follow her for almost a week, interview her friends, but I found out everything. Her name is Lily. She's 22, a graduate of a pedagogical university. She met your husband a few months ago, on the street, I think. Thank you for the information. What about any facts like videos or…" The detective, smiling broadly, reached into the desk drawer and took out a huge old dictaphone. Claire was truly amazed at what she saw. She hadn't seen such devices since childhood. It seemed they weren't made anymore. Twisting something, the man turned on a loud, sometimes crackling recording. "Fee Vinny!" a clear female voice exclaimed. "Is this for me? Oh gods, how wonderful! Expensive, I bet?" "Nothing is too expensive for you," Vincent said with satisfaction. "Once I start my own business, I can spoil you with trinkets every day." "And when?" "Vinny?" the girl asked again. "You said you don't have the money for your own business yet?" There were no sounds, but Claire could have sworn Vincent smiled broadly. "My wife does. She recently inherited from her grandmother. We'll start a business with her money and live well." "You'll leave her, won't you?" Lily said, as if through pouting lips. "As soon as she's no longer useful to me." "Yes," Vincent said loudly. And the recording continued. The man and the girl said something else. However, Claire was no longer listening to them. She was lost in her thoughts, sitting with a perfectly straight back and staring straight ahead. She remembered meeting her husband and how happy she was when he proposed to her. Claire was 11 years younger than Vincent. They met when she was finishing her economics degree. He invited her to cozy cafes, walked with her in the park under the stars, bought tickets to the theater and concerts. Eleanor seemed very nice and decent back then. Claire, who had recently lost her mother, fell in love with the intellectual family and was ready to marry the not-so-rich and shy Vincent. Tanya was against it, but Claire didn't listen. She was consumed by new feelings. Memories flashed in the girl's mind of choosing Vincent's wedding suit with him and of them sorting through gifts after the celebration, counting which relatives had given more. The girl was incredibly happy then. She was sure she would always be so happy. Despite the fact that Vincent wasn't at all happy about her dreams of a business and career, he, and even more so his mother, wanted a family and children. The girl wasn't ready for that. She wanted more. Now all her dreams and hopes for a life together had collapsed in an instant. Vince, the very same Vince who had never raised his voice at his wife, was thinking about how he would start a business with Claire's money and leave her. It seemed so wild that the girl sat staring blankly at the wall for several minutes. The detective didn't interfere. He had seen worse reactions. This was the most normal. Once, a crazy wife simply broke his window in a fit of rage at her husband. At the time, it seemed wild, the ultimate measure of disappointment and anger. But now he looked into the girl's eyes and saw all-consuming hatred and pain that even affected him. The man got up and went for water to bring to his client. Claire drank the water in one gulp and then remembered her friend's words that Vincent was ready to sell his own mother for money. The girl hadn't believed Tanya then, but now it seemed true. A plan began to form in the girl's intelligent mind. A malicious grin appeared on her face, and the detective recoiled. He had never seen such an expression. A few months later, Vincent's dark blue car drove away from the leaning fence, behind which Claire remained. Brenda was holding her chair, or rather, she was leaning on the chair rather than holding it. As soon as the car disappeared from sight, Claire stood up. Brenda's eyes widened, staring at her charge, who had simply stood up from the chair after her illness. "Brenda, let's make a deal. I'll pay you as much as my husband does, and you won't tell him what you saw." Brenda nodded dumbfounded, unable to ask questions. She was still clinging to the chair. "Excellent. We'll be great friends. Here's the first installment." Claire held out a few bills. "You'll come every month and I'll give you money. You, in turn, must tell your husband that my condition hasn't changed and he doesn't need to visit. Clear?" The woman nodded, snatched the bill, and without saying goodbye, walked away, while Claire went into the house to change. Inside the old house, everything was covered in dust. The furniture was draped with fabric and trash lay everywhere. One window was even broken. Perhaps children had tried to get in. Claire walked over to the old red sofa, threw off the fabric, and sank wearily onto the seat. A cloud of dust rose around her. The girl took out her phone from her pocket, which Eleanor had miraculously not found, and dialed the only number she could trust. "Come, everything happened just as you said. Yes, the house is in the village. I'm waiting." Throwing the phone aside, Claire lay down. A multitude of thoughts swirled in her head. She was thinking about everything and nothing at the same time. An hour and a half later, when Claire had already cleaned the house, changed, and prepared food, the door opened and a tall girl in a strict blue suit entered. She had a small bag in her hands, wine and takeout food. "Scrambled eggs don't appeal to me," Tanya smirked, nodding towards the old dirty frying pan, which was covered in such a thick layer of grease that it was probably impossible to wash off. "Fortunately, you brought wine. I definitely wouldn't have been able to get through this day without it." Tanya looked around the small house and nodded to herself. Then her gaze fell upon a package of diapers, and she shook her head. "You sat in this? God, this is terribly disgusting." "Yes, I can't disagree. But do you know what bothered me more?" Claire asked, taking dishes from the cupboards. "What?" Tanya was wiping the table and arranging the food containers. "Eleanor changed my diaper only once a day. It was as if she didn't notice that I was going to the bathroom. She was so engrossed in her novels that she didn't hear me getting up and walking around the house." Tanya laughed. "If you had left the house for a few days, she definitely wouldn't have noticed. The main thing is to put her photo album next to her." "That's for sure," Claire sighed, sitting down at the table. "I still can't believe they left me to die, and they believed a diagnosis made up on the fly. They heard I didn't have long to live and started rejoicing. How could they possibly think about the reality of the diagnosis given by Peter?" Tanya and Claire began to eat, thinking about what they would do next. "I'll stay here for a month or two until I figure out how to live on. I have zero plans for the future. For the first time in my life, I have no plans." "And what are you going to do here?" Tanya asked. "An old abandoned house, an overgrown garden, a remote village. You and such a place are incompatible." "If I rush headfirst into things now, you'll definitely go bankrupt. It's not the right state," Claire explained. "You see, I gave up on my dreams of my own business a long time ago. All the developments and ideas have been gathering dust somewhere in the depths of the apartment. And it seems to me, everything is long outdated. I'll stay here, clear my head, maybe I'll come up with something. I haven't had a vacation in a long time." Tanya shrugged. She didn't know what to say to her friend. For the first time, she was speechless too. She didn't like Vincent without even knowing why. It was foolish of her to refuse to be a bridesmaid. However, she didn't think he was capable of something like this. She had joked, saying he was ready to sell his own mother. To her, Vincent seemed like a spineless guy, incapable of anything but processing insurance. But he was able to abandon a person to die, and not just any person, but his wife. It seemed like some kind of madness. Tanya spent the first night in that house with her friend and left for home the next morning. Claire quit her job, but Tanya didn't, and she didn't have a rich inheritance from a great-grandmother. Claire started the new day with a cold shower. Fortunately, there was water and even gas in her great-grandmother's house. Her parents had once installed all the conveniences for her grandmother in the house, but she died soon after without being able to fully use them. The cold shower managed to refresh her mind, which was full of thoughts, and Claire took a deep breath, feeling the icy drops of water hitting her back. 3 weeks of living in hell were behind her. She had tested her husband. She had hoped to see at least a drop of care or love from him, but in the end, she received only hatred and the expectation of her speedy demise. This was the worst thing. Therefore, Claire couldn't quickly return to her old rhythm. Her familiar life was over. She needed to perk up. She took out the money she had hidden from her suitcase when no one was looking. The girl went to the shop. She vaguely remembered its location and decided to ask the villagers, as it was early morning and everyone was either going to work or to their gardens. It was autumn, cool outside, especially in the morning, and Claire wrapped herself more snugly in an old coat she found in the closet. She managed to find the shop without the help of passers-by. It was exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. The girl smiled at the sight of the familiar colorful sign and the cloudy window through which she could see the counters and a stout saleswoman in a blue apron. Entering, Claire inhaled the familiar smell of fresh bread and the lemonade the saleswoman loved. The woman's name was Valerie. When Claire was little, she had just started working there. Now she was probably in charge of the shop. "Aunt Val, hello. Do you recognize me?" Claire asked. The woman thought for a moment. "Something familiar, but I just can't remember." "I'm Margaret Burke's granddaughter. I was a child here." "Oh, Claire dear, how could I not recognize you?" the woman asked, coming out from behind the counter. She hugged Claire, kissing her cheek. "You haven't been here in so long, and nothing has changed with us." "I noticed. Will you sell me some groceries?" Claire asked, looking at the counters. They were filled with food, although the shop seemed quite small. The girl checked the prices and realized they were even higher than in the city. "The prices are huge!" Valerie spread her hands. "Give me a loaf each of black and white bread, a bottle of milk, butter and vegetable oil, a kilogram each of pasta, buckwheat, rice and peas, cheese, sugar, salt, and, oh, Claire dear, you should go to Mary for the dairy. She lives right next to you. And this milk," the woman nodded towards the counter, "it's shameful to give it even to a cat. Its shelf life is 6 months. Where have you ever seen milk last that long? For vegetables, potatoes, onions, beets, carrots, you should go to David. Everything here is from a local farmer, but it's been sitting here for a long time. Almost everyone in the village has their own gardens, and David always sells cheaply. Ask for directions. He's not far from the shop." Valerie fell silent. Her words were interrupted by a bell and a man who burst into the shop. He was dressed in dirty clothes. His face was very serious. He pushed Claire away from the counter and said loudly, "Valerie, give me 2 bottles of mineral water, and someone was supposed to leave an order for you here. A box of medicines and poison for pests. We need to plant before winter soon, and there's nothing to treat with." "Cole, don't you see there's a customer here?" Valerie asked sternly. Cole glanced at the girl and waved her off. "She's from the city. If she needs it so much, let her buy it there, and I need it urgently." "Cole!" Valerie looked at him strictly. Claire raised her hand in a conciliatory gesture. "Let him go ahead, Aunt Val. He seems to need it more." Valerie, looking displeased, went to get the box. Couldn't this have waited just a few minutes? The man was tall, dark-haired, his hands were work-worn, and his gaze was stern. Claire hadn't seen people like him since childhood. Despite his working, slightly disheveled appearance, Cole was quite handsome and young. He was clearly over 30, but definitely not over 40. He looked at the girl, squinting. "And is that so important to you?" the man asked roughly. "I'm not in a hurry, of course, but even in the city, people wait in line, and believe me, they're in a much bigger hurry than you are." Claire smirked and turned away, feeling the piercing gaze of the man's brown eyes on her. Valerie came out with a heavy box and handed it to the customer. "Take it, the mineral water is over there." She nodded towards the far corner, where mineral water was indeed stacked in plastic packs. "You'll pay later, right?" Cole nodded, picked up 2 bottles of mineral water, and left the shop without saying goodbye. "Who was that?" Claire asked Valerie. The woman waved her hand and went to the shelf with grains. "Local farmer. He inherited a small house and livestock from his father about 8 years ago. He decided to start a farm, built everything himself, did it, hired workers, makes ends meet however he can. He wants to plant fields, but for now, he only plants large gardens and sells produce to our shop and in neighboring villages. He's not a bad guy, just a bit rough. Nobody knows why." Claire bought several bags of groceries and carried them home. They were heavy, and she barely made it, but the small refrigerator in the house no longer looked so bare. Then the girl went to get vegetables and dairy products from the people Valerie had recommended. Although the girl was used to buying everything in the city shop, it was cheaper and better to buy from ordinary people in the village. David lived really close to the shop. He had a large plot of land and 2 goats that bleated loudly at the sight of Claire. As a child, the girl was afraid of animals, so she walked around them now. In the house, Claire found an old man who was making some kind of chair. The girl explained the situation and introduced herself. "Claire, dear, I'm so glad to meet you." The old man smiled through his thick gray beard. "There haven't been young people in the village for so long. You're the first in many years. And Margaret Burke's granddaughter. I only remember her daughter, Natalie." "Yes, that's my mom," the girl nodded. "So will you sell me some vegetables?" "I can give you some apples for change too," David smiled. "They're good, ripe, juicy, and will keep well for the winter. And for compotes, jam. Will you take some?" Claire smiled happily. However, the smile faded from her face when she left the old man with 3 huge bags that weighed twice as much as the previous ones. David had decided to sell her enough produce for a month and a half, apparently thinking the girl would eat only potatoes and beets. Claire felt uncomfortable refusing, so she sacrificed her back, which definitely couldn't handle the load. After walking just a few steps, Claire stopped, heavily placing the bags on the ground. A black car with a large pickup bed stopped nearby. "Need some help?" Hearing the familiar voice, Claire looked up and saw Cole looking at the girl's bags. Remembering the man's words in the shop, the girl started to think. She didn't want to ride with a person who didn't know how to be polite, but she also didn't want to drag the huge bags. Therefore, she had to swallow her pride again. "Yes, that wouldn't hurt." Cole got out of the car and picked up the bags. "You really stocked up. Are you planning to winter here?" "No, I'm making compote, frying potatoes." The girl smirked and picked up a smaller bag, helping to load it into the pickup bed. Cole turned around and took the bag from the girl's hands. Claire felt his warm touch and froze for a second. Then she let go of the rough fabric and took a few steps back. Cole put the bag down and closed the pickup bed. "Tell me the way. Where should I take you?" "Of course I will," Claire said, getting into the passenger seat. "Someone like you from the city?" "Well, yes," Claire said thoughtfully. "And what attracted you here?" "I grew up here," Claire shrugged, "and there were problems at home, and I needed somewhere to be alone. I remembered this little house. I always loved this village. It's quiet and peaceful. Nothing interferes with thinking." "Yes, that's true." Cole drove fast. Either he was in a hurry or it was just his driving style. However, he wasn't only fast when driving, he didn't dawdle in the shop or on the street either, so Claire decided it was a characteristic trait of his. The bags were unloaded and even carried into the house. Cole walked through the grass that reached his waist. It had already started to dry, so it rustled loudly under his feet. "Is there really no one to mow it? My great-grandmother did it herself almost until her death. She could do literally everything, from cutting and sewing to mowing and fixing the roof. And I'm a city girl who can't do anything." Here in the village, almost none of the women can mow, not even with an electric trimmer. Equality hasn't reached here, he smirked. "You're from the city, right?" "Yes, yes," the man replied and looked at his watch. "Look at the time. I should be going." "And what's your name?" "Claire," the girl introduced herself. "Beautiful name. Nice to meet you, Claire." "Nice to meet you too, Cole," the girl smiled. Cole left, leaving the girl alone. Claire watched the departing car for a long time, trying to understand what her new acquaintance would lead to. The next morning began with a clatter and a strange rustling sound. Claire, tossing and turning, got up from the creaky bed and went to the window. Outside, in the middle of the overgrown grass, stood Cole with an old scythe. The grass lay in neat rows under Cole's movements. It was clear he was sweating, despite the cool morning weather. Claire threw open the window and called out to the man. Cole looked back, stopping his mowing. He was breathing deeply, looking at the open window and the girl looking at him. Claire was wearing only a long linen dress she had found in the closet and decided to use as a nightgown. After cleaning the house and cooking, the girl was quite tired. She had no time left to unpack her things, so she put on what she found in her great-grandmother's closet. What are you doing? Cole raised his eyebrows, silently expressing his opinion of the foolish question. I understand you're mowing, but why are you doing it at my house? Do you want me to stop? Cole asked, looking at the girl with a slight smirk. Claire shook her head and closed the window, not wanting to continue the conversation. Besides, she noticed the man's gaze. He was clearly looking her over. To avoid a repeat of such situations, the girl changed and went to the small kitchen. Claire decided to make pancakes. Of course, she never got up this early and didn't want to cook anything. Moreover, the fast city pace had accustomed her not to eat breakfast, but she had to feed the unexpected helper who had decided to come to her house first thing in the morning and work. When Cole finished, which was clear from the cessation of the scythe sound, the pancakes were already ready. Claire was just finishing frying the last one. The girl went out onto the porch and called out to the helper. Come in for breakfast. The man shrugged, put down the scythe, and entered the house. He was all sweaty and tired. You can use the shower. Claire nodded towards the bathroom and went back to the kitchen. Cole didn't take up the hostess's offer. He just washed his face. He came to the kitchen and sat down at the table. A plate with pancakes and sour cream was in front of him. Claire stood by the table, arms crossed. How much do I owe you? Cole raised his eyebrows in a question mark. Well, you didn't do it for free, did you? For the food, the man smirked and took a bite of a pancake. Leaning back in his chair, he looked directly into the girl's eyes, as if wanting to read something in them. Well, if you don't want payment, I won't insist, Claire shrugged. I'm used to any work being paid for. Haven't you heard of helping out in the city? Claire snorted and laughed. You yourself said you're from the city. Aunt Val told me you've been living here for 8 years, which means you can't reproach me. I'm not reproaching you. It's just that city people are always surprised when they're helped for free. I used to be like that too. And why aren't you eating, by the way? Cole asked, tilting his head. He was looking at the girl with interest. I don't eat breakfast, the girl waved him off. I always had to go to work early. I'm not used to it. I usually snacked at work. And what did you do? Cole asked, tilting his head. Assistant to the general director of a company. Cole whistled and smiled. Amazing that after that you ended up here. He gestured around the small house with worn wallpaper. Don't think I was raking in money with a shovel, only with a child's sand scoop. A very child's one. But I liked it. I learned how to run a business, and I had a dream. Then the illness happened, the girl chuckled. But I'll tell you that story some other time. I need to clean the house and the attic today. Besides, a friend promised to come in the evening. A busy life, you know. Cole smiled back at her words. I should be going too anyway. Cole finished breakfast and left Claire's house. She watched him leave with a long gaze again, trying to understand the man's motives. That same evening, Tanya arrived. She brought some things Claire had asked for. Tanya whistled, seeing the mowed and tidy yard. She put down the bags and called out to her friend, who was currently wiping the cloudy windows. I need to replace the glass. What do you think? Where can I find a handyman? She asked without greeting her. Tanya smirked. Ask the man who mowed your entire yard. That was Cole, the local farmer. He gave me a ride yesterday. I don't think he has time for glass. Claire waved it off. Well, he found time for the grass, Tanya shrugged. What farmer? Claire stopped wiping the glass. She invited her friend into the house. If you don't mind, peel the potatoes. They're under the sink. I can't do anything else. I'm tired. Claire sank into a chair and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Tanya took off her jacket and picked up a knife. So what about the farmer? I didn't know him before. He came here 8 years ago. My great-grandmother died around that time. He runs a farm. He has various animals, gardens. What else can I say about him? Is he rich? Tanya, the girl reproached her. What? Tanya protested. That's very important nowadays. Well, okay, what do you think of him as a man? Claire thought for a moment. I don't even know. He's kind of ambiguous. First he was rude to me in the shop, and then he decided that giving me a ride was a good idea. And he even came in the morning to mow the grass, even though I didn't ask, and then he refused to take money. Maybe he liked you? Don't talk nonsense, Claire waved it off. He thinks I'm a city fool, as far as I understand. Look at him closely. Maybe for once in your life, you'll have a normal man who knows he's a man. Claire rolled her eyes but said nothing to that. How's work? Oh, don't ask. Without you, our boss has completely lost it. He's already changed his assistant 3 times. He can't do anything. It turns out you did more than we all thought. Claire had been living in the village for a month. She had gotten used to the small house and the quiet life, and she had also gotten used to resting, and that irritated her terribly. The girl had worked her whole life. She grew up in a not-so-rich family and started working right after studying. She didn't take days off without a special reason and always arrived at work on time. And now she had done almost nothing for a month. Yes, Claire spent the first week on the house. She tried to bring it into a decent state, scrubbing everything around. But then silence and peace set in. The girl woke up late, read books brought by Tanya, visited the old women, and listened to their stories from their youth. Moreover, Claire couldn't shake the thought that she constantly ran into Cole. On the day Tanya visited, he heard the conversation about the glass and came the next morning to replace it. Claire fed him fritters. Then he fixed the gate. The girl made him breakfast again. This happened several more times and it became a habit. Claire was no longer surprised by the early morning clatter outside and the presence of the man under her window, and Cole, as usual, came into the house and sat down at the table. There were almost no long and significant conversations between them. He didn't give her flowers, didn't say compliments. He just was. He was there. It seemed very strange. Claire desperately wanted to understand his motives. Admit it, Cole. You just come here to eat? I didn't say that, the man smirked, looking up from the dripping faucet. Most of their conversations were like this. Short, not very meaningful, and usually playful. Rumors circulated in the village, and some girl from the farm even came to Claire, threatening her. Cole is mine, got it? The voluptuous brunette said menacingly. You think you came here from your city and can snatch our men? No way. The stranger angrily tore a leaf from a tree and threw it at the stunned Claire, who was standing on the porch. When Cole came the next time, she told him about her admirer. Were you scared? The man smirked, but there seemed to be a hint of seriousness in his words. I haven't been afraid of village women yet. I've been threatened by big adult men when I worked at a large company. Once, instead of my boss, I refused to sign a contract with a firm, and they almost beat me up right there. 5 adult men in suits, and I was alone. That's scary. Not a leaf thrown by some crazy admirer of a man who, for some unknown reason, fixes everything that breaks in my house. Cole smiled and fell silent. You're not very talkative, are you? The man nodded. Maybe we should switch to you then? I don't think there's such a big age difference between us. Cole agreed to the girl's suggestion and returned to his borscht. Claire smirked. It was the first time she had seen a man who didn't want to talk. One day, Claire was walking around the village. Cole hadn't visited her for a long time, and she assumed he had gotten bored. She went for a walk to clear her head, and deep down, she hoped she would meet Cole on the way. For some reason, she really wanted to see him again. She had become so used to his strange silence that she almost missed it. The only thing the girl encountered in the village was men running back and forth. They were talking about something. Claire went up to Valerie, who had come out of the shop and was looking anxiously into the distance. Aunt Val, what happened? The woman put her hand to her face. Well, Cole's farm is falling apart. Something's wrong there, some troubles. Our men and women are completely distraught. They might lose their jobs. And where else can you find work in our village? Oh, what a disaster. Cole always barely stayed afloat, managed as best he could, but now something has gone completely wrong. Claire frowned and looked into the distance. Can you tell me the way to Cole's farm? Valerie explained how to get to Cole, to his work. His farm was at the very end of the village. It was a large, long building from which the mooing of cows could be heard. Here and there, women in aprons walked around, carrying buckets. There were men in the backyard. Large gardens were laid out behind the farm. Now, in mid-autumn, they were empty. Claire asked a passing woman where Cole's office was and went there. The man's office was small, even tiny. In the middle stood a desk and a chair. In the corner, a cupboard and a small window in the wall, through which crumbs of light penetrated. Cole himself stood in the middle of the office, bent over papers. He was saying something with his lips only, calculating on a calculator and making corrections to documents. Claire came closer. "Cole, hello." The man turned sharply and sighed. "Did something break again?" he asked. "Sorry, now isn't the best time." "No," Claire replied. "I heard you have problems. I came to help." "Something with documents? It's fine, I'll manage," the man said somewhat roughly, and she came closer and almost pushed Cole aside, taking the papers. The man exhaled loudly. "Go away, or I'll have to drag you out of here by force." Claire raised her hand and looked closely. She had only glanced at the papers, but she already saw huge sums and exorbitant expenses that were simply unnecessary for this small place compared to the city. "Do you even have an accountant or a financial specialist?" "I manage everything myself," Cole repeated. "I see how you manage. Fabulous expenses leading nowhere. You urgently need a specialist." "And where am I supposed to get one?" Cole asked glumly. Claire smiled broadly and pointed to herself. "I'm an economist by education. Besides, I worked for several years at a firm where the expenses and revenues were clearly much higher than yours." Cole waved his hand and sat down wearily on the chair, leaving Claire with the papers. Late in the evening, when it was already dark, Cole and Claire left his office. The farm was empty. The workers had cleaned up and closed everything. "Are you sure that if you eliminate these expenses, nothing will change? Why do you need both cold storage and milk delivery 3 times a day? One is enough. It will be taken away, and for the rest of the time, it will be stored in the refrigerator. There's no point in driving cars and spending huge amounts of money on this. And it's the same with many expenses. The estimates are very poorly drawn up." Cole scratched the back of his head in confusion. "I was in the military, actually. I'm far from estimates, accounting. My father always dreamed of having his own big farm and fields, but I decided to fulfill his dream, even if it's late." "Late? He died?" "Thank God, no. He got seriously ill. I had to put him in a special facility. Otherwise, I just couldn't handle him. So I had to raise the farm from its knees." Claire looked at Cole sympathetically, walking along the narrow path. It was cool outside, the wind was blowing, but at the same time, it seemed things couldn't be better. So calm and quiet. "So what's the story with the illness?" Cole asked unexpectedly. Claire flinched. At first, she wanted to joke it off, but then she remembered she had promised to tell him. Exhaling loudly, she began her story. "That's when I came up with that plan." She remembered the conversation with the detective. "Claire and Tanya helped me carry it out. She found a doctor who, for a small fee, agreed to say that I was ill and would die soon. They believed it quickly, as if without thinking and expecting it. It was terrible. The 3 weeks I lived with my husband and mother-in-law completely extinguished any pity or sympathy I had for him. I became forgotten and unwanted, and when he brought me here, I understood that this was the end." Cole took the girl's hand and squeezed it tightly. Claire looked at the hand the man was holding and nodded in thanks for the support. "Why don't you go back to the city?" "At first, I just wanted to calm down and wait a bit, but then I realized I didn't want to go back there. It's such a fast pace, constant rushing around. Plus, another reminder of Vince and his mother." Cole let go of the girl's hand and sped up. "Let's go. I'll show you something." They walked for a long time. Claire didn't know where. However, when they arrived, she gasped in amazement. The man had brought her to a huge, luxurious house with a high fence. This is the house of a friend of mine. We served together. He recently died of an illness. Now the house is for sale. And I don't want it. I would like to buy it, but as you know, I don't have the money. The house is going to be bought to be demolished and something like a sawmill built here. Or, I don't even know. You understand that if you buy this house, there will be no turning back? I don't want to go back to the city. For the village, I'm too fast, impatient. For the city, I'm too slow. It's such a paradox. Here I can achieve something and there I can't. Claire's gaze lingered on the man's stern face, on his eyes that looked at the house with hope, on his tightly pressed lips, and on the wrinkles on his forehead that appeared when Cole was thinking about something serious. A determined spark lit up in Claire's eyes. She squeezed Cole's hand, just as he had done a few minutes ago, and smiled. You will definitely succeed. I will help. We will raise the farm, and you will become what your father dreamed of. I promise. Cole didn't answer again, but the hope that flickered in his eyes made her happy. He believed in the best. Cole and Claire began to work together. She helped him raise the farm and create new working conditions. They bought new livestock and equipment. Profit began to appear not only on paper. The man was very happy about this. He gave the girl flowers several times as a sign of gratitude, and the tradition of fixing Claire's house also returned. He came almost every morning and she made breakfast. It was their ritual. A few weeks after the walk, Tanya came to the girl and brought documents. Are you sure? She asked her friend. More than sure, Claire replied and took the folder. There's no turning back, Tanya repeated Claire's own words. I know, and I'm ready to take the risk. Tanya fell silent, not wanting to argue with her friend. After what had happened, she tried to support her in all her endeavors. Claire pressed the documents to her chest and headed towards the farm. New equipment was supposed to arrive today, so the girl hurried as much as she could. Besides, she had good news. Claire found Cole, as usual, in his office. He was sitting at the desk and writing something. At the sight of the girl, he smiled and brightened up. You're early, he said, pulling out a chair for Claire. The girl sat down at the table and placed the papers on it. Read this. Cole took the folder and slowly leafed through the papers. With each page, his eyes grew wider and wider. The girl watched his reaction with hidden fear and anticipation. Closing the folder, Cole put it on the table and lowered his eyes to the girl. What have you done? He asked hoarsely. Did you buy the house? Claire nodded and sank wearily into the chair. She sat directly opposite the man, tilting her head back and looking him straight in the eyes. You didn't want it to be demolished. It was your friend's house, and I promised you would succeed. That's a lot of money, Cole exhaled. It's my money. I do whatever I want with it. Besides, I like the village and… Claire's train of thought was interrupted by a kiss. Is this how you decided to get the house? Claire smirked when Cole pulled away. Is that what you think of me? He asked hoarsely. No, the girl exhaled. I bought this house for us if you want us to be together. I think I've fallen in love. The man kissed the girl again. Me too, he replied, gently hugging Claire. The present. Vincent sat opposite his wife and couldn't believe her story. His hands lay limply on his knees and his eyes stared straight ahead. He wasn't trying to see anything. He just couldn't turn his head in amazement. Are you saying you made all this up to test me? Claire looked at him sadly and sipped her tea. There was a knock at the door. Tanya entered in a tight blue dress. She looked directly at Vincent and smirked. Well, did you tell him everything? Too bad I couldn't see his face. I was a little late. So you knew everything? Vincent roared. Tanya smirked. That was my doctor, whom I paid for the diagnosis. Did you really think Claire did all this alone? She loved you too much to do this, but you broke her heart. You decided you could treat her like garbage. Vincent pursed his lips. You don't know anything. Claire, I love you. Claire. Claire raised her eyebrows and smirked. And Lily, does she no longer suit you? Or couldn't she wait for you to start your business and shower her with gifts? Vincent opened his mouth to object, but fell silent at the last moment, realizing that excuses were pointless. "But how dare you play such a trick on Mom and me?" Vincent asked. "She was so upset when she found out you were sick." Tanya and Claire exchanged glances and laughed. Eleanor was running ahead of everyone, shouting with joy that her daughter-in-law was sick and would soon kick the bucket. "She was waiting for my inheritance more than you were." Vincent looked around the house, then smiled broadly. "You bought and earned all this while married to me?" Tanya frowned, understanding what her friend's husband was getting at. She wanted to object, but he opened his mouth again. "And since you acquired this while married to me, half of the property is mine, right?" Tanya was a lawyer. She knew the law perfectly well and how such situations ended. Claire stood up from her chair and glared angrily at her husband, wanting to tell him everything she thought of him. But at that moment, the door opened, and the very man from the car that had cut off Vincent entered. "Hi, Cole." Tanya nodded and whispered something in the man's ear. He turned to Vincent with a very serious, enraged face. It seemed almost impossible to stop him. He advanced on the man. Vincent swallowed in fear and began to back away. "Get out! If you idiot, decide to threaten Claire, I'll make your life hell," Cole said roughly, grabbed Vincent by the scruff of the neck, and threw him out of the room. Tanya, Claire, and Cole heard the front door slam. Vincent was walking away from the house quickly. "Why did you let him in?" Cole asked Claire, coming closer to her and hugging her from behind. In front of her husband, she had held herself together, not wanting to show weakness, but everyone in the room knew how difficult it was for her to endure her husband's betrayal. The girl stood with her head bowed low, holding back the urge to cry. "I had to tell him everything," the girl said. "I needed to see his face when he realized that my inheritance wasn't going to him." "Did that make you feel better?" Tanya asked. Claire nodded and wrapped herself more tightly in Cole's strong and reliable embrace. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Despite Cole's threats, Vincent still decided to sue for divorce and property division. From a legal standpoint, he was right. If he wanted to claim the inheritance, he would be wrong. But the girl had bought the house and leased the fields, the income from which is considered jointly acquired property. The court notification arrived by mail. Cole brought it with the other documents and handed it to the girl grimly. When Claire opened the envelope and read the court summons, she turned pale in a second and sat down wearily on the sofa. She was all dirty and dusty, having just come from the fields, but she didn't care. She hadn't thought Vincent would actually sue for property division. However, she had also thought he wouldn't abandon her to die. He turned out to be a very unpredictable person. "We need a good lawyer," Cole said, picking up the notification. "Tanya," Claire said. "She heads the legal department at the firm. She has a license to handle cases. I think she can help us. Besides, we don't need to tell her our story." Cole sat down next to the girl. "Listen, I looked in the bathroom after you yesterday and—" Claire looked at the man fearfully. "I don't know what to say, and I found a test there. Are you pregnant?" Claire nodded. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd be against it and—" A soft kiss interrupted the girl. She hugged the man and smiled broadly. "So you're not against it?" His joyful smile and mischievous eyes answered better than any words. He hugged the girl tightly and held her close. "If that scoundrel suddenly decides to sue you for half the property, I don't care. We won't be left with nothing. We'll have our house, the fields, a child, and ourselves. We'll have each other." Claire closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But when she opened them, Cole saw the look that had once frightened the detective. It was a determined and unwavering gaze. "He went to court to take what belongs to me by blood, but he'll leave there with nothing. I'll take not only what's mine, but everything he has. He'll be left with nothing." The court hearing took place very soon, as if the universe itself wanted to finish this strange case quickly. Tanya became Claire's lawyer. Cole supported the girl from the witness bench, as did many villagers. The judge was a tall, red-haired woman with a strict gaze. She listened to the plaintiff Vincent's statement with boredom, asking him clarifying questions that he couldn't always answer. It seemed to amuse her. The plaintiff's witnesses included Eleanor, neighbors, and Vincent's friends. They all said only bad things about the girl. Eleanor went on as if for the last time, putting on her full dramatic performance. "I was so scared when Claire dear, and when she got sick, I didn't sleep for 3 nights, waiting for news from the hospital." Tears flowed from the woman's eyes. She wiped them with a white handkerchief and continued. "And when I saw Claire dear, I almost had a heart attack myself. She wasn't moving, she was almost lifeless. I had to take care of her while Vinny was working. I cleaned up after her, fed her, and she wasn't sick after all. The worst thing I could ever experience has already happened to me. My son and I were betrayed, deceived, and now they want to leave us with nothing." Eleanor cried again and sat back down on the bench. The judge, after her speech, seemed to get drawn into the case and listened to the other witnesses with interest. "Your Honor, you should not trust the words of the plaintiff and his witnesses. Let's start with the fact that the defendant has evidence of the plaintiff's infidelity. The recording is attached to the case." The recording of Lily and Vincent's conversation boomed throughout the courtroom. Then the detective testified as a witness, recounting the plaintiff's relationships. "Lies!" Eleanor jumped up from the bench, but after a warning from the judge, she sat back down. She seemed deeply upset by the slander. Furthermore, I wish to note that the defendant did not deceive the plaintiff documentation-wise. She merely pretended to be ill to test him. No medical certificates were provided. The doctor only verbally gave the patient's diagnosis to the plaintiff and his mother, and the plaintiff's side claims they took care of the sick defendant, Tanya continued. "However, I have a recording of a conversation between Ms. Eleanor Lewis and her son. Please play it." "Yes, Vinny dear, feed her. Oh, I got lost in my reading. I completely forgot. But it's okay. She can wait until lunch. She won't lose any weight. How are you doing there? Did you find a caregiver for her?" "Good. The main thing is she charges little, and the fact that she drinks, it's nothing serious. The doctor said she won't last long anyway." The conversation was turned off, and the room gasped in amazement. Tanya continued. "Furthermore, the plaintiff filed a petition for the division of the following property: a residential house at the address Ilinskaya Village, Rapina Street, House 8, as well as income from the fields of the Golden Birch Company, which were indeed purchased by Ms. Claire Lewis, the defendant, but this property was already transferred to the full ownership of Mr. Cole Carter a week before the lawsuit was filed. Consequently, the property was acquired in marriage and also given away in marriage. This means the plaintiff cannot demand its division. The remaining funds in the defendant's personal account and the share in the estate in Germany are part of the inheritance, which the plaintiff also has no right to claim." The judge smirked. She did it almost imperceptibly, but Claire could have sworn she looked at Vincent with a hint of joy. To transfer the property to Cole's ownership, they had to work hard and find a corrupt notary who concluded the deal retroactively. This greatly helped the case. "Well then, thus the claim is considered invalid?" the judge asked Tanya. "Mr. Vincent Lewis's claim is aimed at the equal division of property between the former spouses, but this is not only the defendant's property but also the plaintiff's own property, namely a 3-room apartment at the address Pegasova Street, House 24, 3rd entrance, apartment 33, a BMW car, as well as funds in the joint account of the plaintiff and the defendant." "I object." The plaintiff's lawyer, a stout old man with a bald head and round glasses, jumped up from his seat. "The apartment is the plaintiff's inheritance from his father, correct?" "Correct," Tanya nodded. "But according to the law, if one spouse has made significant improvements to the other spouse's property, it can be recognized as joint property." "And what significant improvements were made?" the lawyer asked. "Now on the screen, Your Honor, you will see photos of the apartment before its renovation. As you can see, it was in sufficient condition. This was exactly 1 year after the wedding. And here are photos of the apartment after the renovation, 6 months later." "How will you prove that this was done with the defendant's funds?" Firstly, during the period from September to April, when the renovation took place, the plaintiff was not working, and according to the bank statement, he did not have the necessary amount of funds in his personal account. Furthermore, the testimony of the foreman of the team that did the renovation is attached to the case. The contract was concluded in the defendant's name. The lawyers argued for a long time, called witnesses, and tried to prove their point of view, but soon the judge withdrew to deliver the verdict. She returned with a large red folder. "All rise, the court is in session," the judge's assistant announced. The court ruled to satisfy the plaintiff's claim. Mr. Vincent Lewis's property will be divided between him and his wife. 1/3 of the apartment goes to the defendant, the car becomes jointly owned, and 50% of the funds from the plaintiff's account become the property of Ms. Claire Lewis. The court's decision is final and not subject to appeal. The bang of the gavel settled everything. Vincent and Eleanor looked with malice and hatred at Claire, whom Cole was hugging. Tanya, smiling broadly, joined them. "I told you we'd take everything from him," the girl said in a slightly strange, even obsessed voice. "This is rightfully yours, not his," Cole exhaled. "Understand? From now on, you and I have everything we dreamed of," the man smiled. "All that's left is to have a child and the house will be full," Tanya said, gathering her papers. "Well?" Claire stretched out her hand and looked at her belly. Tanya smiled. "Fast indeed. Will you make me godmother?" "Do we have a choice?" Cole asked. "None." Claire smiled and hugged the two dearest people in her life again. From now on, everything would definitely be fine for her.